It was just an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that usually blurs into all the others. For little Leo, who was barely 2, it was a day of exploration. His world was still so new, made up of towering furniture, the fascinating mystery of his own feet, and the endless curiosity that comes with discovering life for the very first time. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And I am curious where you're watching from. Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. His parents were in the next room, the comforting hum of their voices a backdrop to his tiny adventures. That's when he heard it, a sound so faint that his adult parents, with their ears tuned to doorbells and phone alerts, completely missed it. But Leo heard it. It was a whimper, a muffled, sad little cry that seemed to be coming from the wall. Now, this wasn't just any wall. It was in the old part of the house, the section his parents always said had character, which Leo was now beginning to understand might mean it had secrets. He toddled over, his diaper rustling, and pressed his ear against the cool plaster. There was again a scratch, a soft, desperate whine. To his parents, it was nothing. The house settling, the wind, maybe the pipes. But a child's intuition is a powerful, uncorrupted thing. Leo didn't have the logic to dismiss it. He only knew that something or someone in that wall was sad and needed help. He started patting the wall with his chubby little hand, babbling back at the sound, creating a silent conversation between a baby and a mystery. His persistent fascination with that one spot on the wall finally got his mother's attention. At first, she smiled, thinking it was just another one of his cute games. But the way he kept returning to it, his face serious, his babbling taking on a tone of concern, made her pause. She knelt down and listened. Nothing. She was about to chalk it up to an overactive imagination when she heard it. A long, shuddering sigh that was unmistakably alive. A cold dread trickled down her spine. Her mind raced through rational explanations. A trapped squirrel, a bird that found its way into the vents. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, a darker, more terrifying possibility began to form. Driven by a mix of fear and a desperate need to know, Leo's father, Mark, made a decision. He got his toolbox. With a deep breath, he carefully tapped a small hole into the plaster, the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Leo watched wide-eyed from his mother's arms. As the small piece of wall gave way, a wave of stale, musty air washed over them. And then, from the darkness within, they saw it, the glint of 2 eyes reflecting the living room light. Not the beady eyes of a rodent, but the soulful, intelligent eyes of a dog, a German shepherd. The sight that greeted them as they carefully widened the hole was one of pure, heart-shattering horror. The dog was cemented into a small, tomb-like space within the wall. It wasn't just trapped. It had been deliberately, cruelly imprisoned. Its beautiful fur was matted with dust and grime. Its body was terrifyingly thin, and its legs were stuck fast in a crude, hard block of concrete. The poor animal was too weak even to bark, but it managed a feeble thump of its tail against the concrete floor of its prison when it saw Leo's face. That single, trusting gesture, a flicker of hope in the face of unimaginable cruelty, broke his parents' hearts into a million pieces. The next few hours were a frantic, emotional whirlwind. Emergency calls were made, not just to animal control, but to the fire department, to anyone who could help. The world outside this family's terrifying discovery continued on, completely unaware. But soon, a small army of helpers was in their living room. Firemen with gentle hands and powerful tools worked carefully, their faces grim and determined as they chipped away at the concrete that had been this dog's coffin. A local veterinarian was on site, ready with 4 fluids and a soft voice. The entire rescue was filmed on a phone, the footage shaky, raw, and unbearably real. They named him Samson, because it was clear he had the strength of a warrior to have survived such an ordeal. The video of his rescue, of his emaciated body being carefully lifted from that dark hole, of the way he licked the face of the fireman who finally freed him, didn't just move a neighborhood or a town. It was posted online, and almost overnight, it went viral. The world saw what had been done to Samson, and the world cried. They cried tears of anger for the unspeakable cruelty he had endured. They cried tears of sorrow for his suffering. But most of all, they cried tears of awe for the incredible resilience of this animal, and for the pure, innocent child whose unwavering belief had led to his salvation. Samson was rushed to the animal hospital, his fight for life far from over. The community and then the world rallied. Donations for his medical care poured in from every corner of the globe. But as Samson began his long, painful road to recovery, surrounded by the love of his new family, Leo, who refused to leave his side, and his grateful parents, one burning, unresolved question hung in the air, a dark cloud over this miraculous story. Who could do such a thing? Who could look into the loyal eyes of a German shepherd, a creature known for its devotion and courage, and sentence it to such a slow, terrifying death? The police had opened an investigation, but the answers were buried as deeply as Samson had been. The person who did this was still out there, walking free, a shadow of cruelty in a world that had just fallen in love with a dog named Samson. And the search for the truth, that's a story all on its own. Of course, here is a continuation of the story. The veterinary hospital became Samson's new world, a sterile, bright place that was a complete opposite of the darkness he'd known. For the first few days, his survival was hour by hour. Dehydration and severe malnutrition were the obvious enemies. But the vets were also deeply worried about his spirit. He lay listlessly on the soft blankets, barely lifting his head when someone entered the room. It was as if the will to live had been almost completely extinguished within that wall. Leo's family visited every day, the parents speaking in hushed, hopeful tones. But it was Leo who made the real difference. He would sit on the floor beside the kennel, his small hand reaching through the bars to rest on Samson's paw. He'd babble stories about his toys, about the sun in the sky, about the dog he knew was still in there. He wasn't trying to nurse him back to health. He was just keeping his friend company. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Samson began to respond. The first time his tail gave a single, soft thump against the blanket, while Leo was talking, his mother had to leave the room to cry. It was the first sign that the dog's heart hadn't been cemented shut. Back at home, the house felt different. The hole in the wall was temporarily boarded up, but it was a constant, grim reminder. The police had come and gone, taking statements and photographs. They were treating it as a case of severe animal cruelty, but the trail was stone cold. The family had only lived in the house for a year, and the previous owners were a kind, elderly couple who had loved the place. They were as horrified as anyone when they were contacted. They swore they knew nothing, that they'd never even owned a dog. This meant the act of cruelty had happened in the brief period between the old couple moving out and Leo's family moving in. The house had sat empty for nearly 3 months. Anyone could have gotten in. Mark, Leo's father, found himself unable to sleep. He'd pace the hallway at night, his mind racing. He started looking at the house not as a home, but as a crime scene. He began noticing small things he'd overlooked before. A section of the basement floor had a patch of newer, slightly different colored concrete. His blood ran cold when he saw it, but quick, tense investigation with a hammer and chisel revealed nothing but solid ground. He found an old, faded sticker for a local landscaping company tucked away in a kitchen drawer, a remnant from a previous era. He started digging through old paperwork that had been left in the attic, looking for any clue, any name that felt out of place. The mystery was becoming an obsession. He needed to understand the why. How could someone harbor such hatred for an innocent animal? Meanwhile, the story of the miracle dog, as the news channels had dubbed Samson, was spreading like wildfire. The viral video had tapped into a global well of emotion. People from every continent sent get-well cards, handmade blankets, and toys to the animal hospital. A social media campaign with the hashtag Justice for Samson was trending, putting pressure on the local authorities to find the perpetrator. This public outcry was a double-edged sword. It brought immense support for Samson's recovery, but it also brought the crazies. The family started getting messages from people claiming they knew who did it, offering wild theories and false accusations. It was a flood of both compassion and chaos, and it was becoming hard to tell which was which. One afternoon, a woman named Sarah, who ran a local German shepherd rescue organization, showed up at the hospital. She had seen the news and felt a personal, sickening pull to the case. She asked to see the family. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. She told him that over the past 2 years, 3 other German shepherds in the surrounding counties had gone missing under strange circumstances. One vanished from a secure backyard. Another was taken during a brief window when his owner ran into a store. A third was an older rescue dog that had been staying with a foster family. She had always thought it was a strange, terrible coincidence. Now, she was terrified it wasn't a coincidence at all. The way they were taken, it wasn't random, Sarah said, her voice low. It was calculated. They were targeted. And no bodies were ever found. The air in the room went cold. The thought was too horrifying to fully grasp. This wasn't just about one act of sudden, brutal cruelty. This pointed to something far more sinister, a pattern, a person, or maybe even multiple people, with a specific, twisted fixation on this breed. The act of cementing Samson in a wall wasn't just a way to hide a crime. It felt like a signature, a statement. As Samson grew stronger, finally able to stand and take a few wobbly steps on his own, the vet gave the okay for him to go home. The day he walked out of the hospital, a small crowd of supporters and media had gathered. He was still skinny, his coat patchy, but he walked with a new leash and a quiet dignity, his head held high. Leo was there, holding his father's hand, a huge smile on his face. The moment Samson saw the little boy, his entire demeanor changed. His ears perked up, his tail began to wag in a steady, happy rhythm, and he gently pulled on the leash to get to him. He leaned his head against Leo's small chest, and Leo wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. The photograph of that embrace would be seen around the world. It was a perfect picture of redemption. But that night, as Samson slept soundly on a soft dog bed right next to Leo's crib, the fear in the house had only mutated. It was no longer just the ghost of what had happened to Samson. It was a chilling possibility that the person who did this was still out there. Were they watching the news? Were they seeing this global celebration of the life they had tried to extinguish? Were they angry, or were they planning to do it again? Mark looked out the kitchen window into the dark, quiet street. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Every passing car felt like a threat. They had saved a dog, but they had unearthed a nightmare. And somewhere in the darkness, the author of that nightmare was still free, a question mark of pure evil that hung over their happy ending, threatening to rewrite it. The mystery was no longer just about finding who hurt Samson. It was about stopping them before they could ever hurt another innocent soul. The quiet comfort of their home life now felt like a fragile shell. On the surface, everything was perfect. Samson was blossoming. He learned to play, tentatively at first, with a squeaky toy, startling himself with the sound. He followed Leo around the house like a massive, gentle shadow, his devotion so profound it was almost palpable. At night, he would sleep with his head pressed against the door of Leo's room, a living, breathing barrier between the child and the world. He was more than a pet. He was a member of the family, a walking miracle. But underneath this beautiful new normal, a constant, low hum of anxiety thrummed through the house. The locked doors and closed curtains felt less like routine and more like a necessary defense. Mark's obsession with the case only deepened. He turned the spare room into a makeshift command center, the walls papered with printouts, maps, and timelines. Sarah, the rescue worker, had become an unlikely ally, providing him with the files on the other missing German shepherds. The more he looked, the more a terrifying pattern emerged. All the dogs were male. All were taken from the edges of their properties, from spots just out of their owner's immediate sight lines. It was the work of someone patient, someone who watched and waited, someone who knew dogs. Mark spent his evenings online, falling down rabbit holes in obscure forums, reading disturbing comments from trolls who mocked Samson's story and celebrated the cruelty. It was a dark world he never knew existed, and it left him feeling soiled and paranoid. The police, led by a weary but determined Detective Evans, were doing their best under the glare of the media spotlight. The hashtag Justice for Samson hashtag was a constant reminder of public pressure. They had followed up on the landscaping company's sticker Mark found. It led to a dead end, a small, family-run business that had done work for the previous owners years ago. The owner was horrified by the connection and cooperated fully, providing old work schedules that revealed nothing. Still, it was a thread, and in an investigation this cold, you pull every thread you find. Detective Evans decided to re-interview the previous homeowners, the elderly couple. He needed to know if they'd seen anyone lurking around the property in those final months before the sale. Had there been any strange workers, any unexpected visitors they dismissed? Meanwhile, the story took another unexpected turn. A man named David, who lived 2 towns over, saw a news segment featuring Sarah. He'd lost his own German Shepherd, Rex, almost 18 months ago. He'd always believed Rex had just run away, maybe hit by a car, and he'd tortured himself with guilt. But the details of Samson's case made him rethink everything. He called the tip line, his voice choked with a new kind of grief. He told them that a week before Rex disappeared, he'd had a confrontation with a man, a quiet, unassuming man who had been parked near the end of the street, just sitting in his car. David had thought he was lost and approached to offer help. The man had been startled, almost angry. He'd muttered something about looking for a friend's house and driven off quickly. David had forgotten all about it until now. What stuck in his memory was the man's eyes. They were empty, he said, completely void of any feeling. This was the first potential eyewitness description. It was vague, but it was something. The sketch artist worked with David, but the resulting face was generic, forgettable. It could have been anyone. Yet, for the first time, the shadowy figure had a shape, however faint. The police distributed the sketch to the media, asking for the public's help in identifying the man. The response was overwhelming and, as before, a mess. Hundreds of calls came in. People naming ex-boyfriends, difficult neighbors, or suspicious-looking strangers from their own memories. Sifting through the pile of false leads and bitter grudges was a monumental task. At home, the sketch was now taped to Mark's wall. He'd stare at it for hours, trying to will a memory, a recognition to surface. He started driving around their neighborhood and the surrounding areas on his way home from work, his eyes scanning for that generic sedan, that forgettable face. He knew it was probably pointless, maybe even a little unhinged, but he felt like he had to be doing something. The inaction was eating him alive. His wife, Clara, watched him with growing concern. She saw the circles under his eyes, the way he jumped at every small noise. She was living her own private nightmare, trying to balance the profound joy of Samson's recovery with the terrifying thought that the person who did this was still out there, possibly watching them. Her fear was a constant, cold stone in her stomach, especially when she watched Leo and Samson playing together in the backyard. She never let them out of her sight. One evening, while Samson was lying at Mark's feet as he worked in the spare room, the dog suddenly lifted his head. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound they had never heard from him before. His ears were pinned back, his body tense, his gaze fixed on a window that looked out onto the dark street. Mark's blood ran cold. He moved quickly to the window, his heart hammering against his ribs, and peered out. The street was empty and still. Nothing moved. But Samson remained on high alert for nearly an hour, his eyes never leaving that window, a silent sentinel, remembering a danger the rest of them could only imagine. He had sensed something or someone out there in the dark. The question was, were they getting closer to the truth, or was the truth getting closer to them? The fragile shell of their safety had just developed its first hairline crack. The air in the house changed after that night. Samson's growl had shifted the threat from something abstract to something tangible, something that lingered just beyond the glow of the porch light. Mark bought security cameras, their little red lights blinking like watchful eyes from every corner of the house. The familiar creaks and groans of their old home, once just background noise, now sounded like footsteps. Clara found herself checking the locks on the doors 3, sometimes 4 times before bed. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, her ears straining, listening for the sound of a car engine idling too long outside or the crunch of gravel on their driveway. The police, spurred by Samson's reaction and Mark's frantic call, increased patrols past their house. But they were stretched thin, bogged down by the mountain of useless tips from the release sketch. Detective Evans admitted to Mark over the phone that they were spinning their wheels. Without a fresh lead, something concrete, we're just waiting for him to make a mistake, he'd said, his voice heavy with frustration. The words "make a mistake" echoed in Mark's mind. What would that mistake look like? Another missing dog? Or something worse? It was Sarah from the rescue who brought the first flicker of a real break. She had been tirelessly cross-referencing the dates and locations of the missing German shepherds, looking for any commonality they might have missed. She called Mark, her voice buzzing with a nervous energy. "I think I found something," she said. "It's a long shot, but it's the only thing that fits." She explained that on the weekend each dog had gone missing. There had been a small local community event, a street fair, a farmer's market, a park cleanup within a 5-mile radius of the theft. These were events that drew people out of their houses, creating noise and distraction. The perfect cover for someone to snatch a dog from a backyard without being noticed. The most recent event, which happened just a week before they discovered Samson on the wall, was a spring fling festival right in their own town. Mark's blood ran cold. He and Clara had taken Leo to that festival. They had been out of the house for most of the day. That was the window. That was when it must have happened. The person hadn't just randomly chosen their house. They had known the family would be gone, known the house would be empty. They had planned it. This new information lit a fire under the investigation. Detective Evans and his team began pulling attendance records, vendor lists, and volunteer sheets from all the events. It was a massive undertaking, a sea of names. Mark, unable to sit still, drove to the town hall and managed to get a copy of the Spring Fling volunteer list. He brought it home, the paper feeling heavy and significant in his hands. That night, after Clara and Leo were asleep, he sat at his desk with Samson at his feet and started going through the names one by one. Most were strangers. Some were local busybodies he recognized. His eyes scanned down the page, his mind numb with fatigue, until one name near the bottom made him freeze. It was the name of the landscaping company from the sticker he'd found in the drawer, not the owner. But the company itself was listed as having provided a portable greenhouse for the event. It was a connection, thin as a thread, but it was there. His heart started to pound. He pulled up the company's website, his fingers clumsy on the keyboard. He clicked on the Our Team page, and a grid of smiling faces loaded on the screen. There were about a dozen employees. He scanned them, his eyes moving from one face to another, not really expecting anything. And then he stopped, his breath caught in his throat. It was him, the man from the sketch, the generic, forgettable face. He was right there, third from the left, with a faint, uncomfortable smile. His name was listed as Ben Miller. He was a real person. Mark's hands were trembling. This was it. This was the concrete lead they needed. He felt a surge of triumphant adrenaline so powerful it made him dizzy. He reached for his phone to call Detective Evans, his mind already racing ahead to the arrest, the confrontation, the end of this nightmare. But as he fumbled with the device, a movement outside the window caught his eye. He looked up. A car, a dark, unremarkable sedan, was parked across the street under the shadow of a large oak tree. It hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. As Mark watched, paralyzed, the driver's side window slowly, silently, rolled down, and from the darkness within, the faint red glow of a cigarette tip flared to life, a single, burning eye staring directly at his house. Samson, who had been sleeping peacefully, suddenly lifted his head. A deep, warning growl rumbled in his chest, lower and more menacing than before. He rose to his feet, his body a rigid line of tension, his own gaze locked on the same window, on that single point of light in the darkness. The man was here. He wasn't a ghost in a file or a face on a screen anymore. He was outside right now, watching them, and he knew that they knew. The hunt had just turned into a siege. Mark's blood turned to ice. Every instinct screamed at him to call the police, to rush outside, to do something. But he was frozen, locked in that silent, terrifying standoff with the glowing ember across the street. This wasn't a random drive-by. This was a message. Ben Miller, the man with the forgettable face, was showing him that he knew where Mark lived, that he knew Mark was awake, and that he wasn't afraid. Next to him, Samson's growl deepened into a continuous, chest-rumbling snarl. The dog's lips pulled back, revealing teeth, his entire being focused on the threat outside. This was no longer the scared, broken animal they had rescued. This was a protector, a warrior remembering the scent of his enemy. Moving slowly, as if any sudden motion might trigger an explosion, Mark picked up his phone. He didn't dial 911. He called Detective Evans directly, his voice a tight, hushed whisper. "He's here," Mark breathed into the phone. "Ben Miller. He's in a dark sedan, parked across the street. Right now." He could hear the detective's sharp intake of breath, followed by the sound of immediate movement. "Stay inside. Do not confront him. We're on our way." The minutes that followed were the longest of Mark's life. He watched the car, the cigarette tip glowing, then fading, then glowing again. It was an agonizing, deliberate performance. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the red ember was tossed from the window, arcing into the street in a shower of sparks. The car's engine roared to life, not with a panicked screech, but with a calm, almost leisurely rumble. It pulled away from the curb and drove slowly down the street, its taillights disappearing around the corner. By the time Detective Evans and 2 squad cars arrived, the street was empty and silent once more. They did a quick patrol, found nothing, and the lead detective stood in Mark's living room, his face grim. He was brazen. Evans said, "Coming here like that, it means he's feeling the pressure, but it also means he's escalating. This is a dangerous shift." The next morning, armed with a photo and name from the landscaping company, the police moved quickly. They went to Ben Miller's last known address, an apartment on the other side of town, only to find it empty. The landlord said Miller had paid his rent in cash and had moved out abruptly 2 days prior, leaving behind little more than a stained mattress and a few bags of trash. It was a dead end. He had vanished. The feeling of victory Mark had felt the night before curdled into a profound, sinking dread. The man wasn't just a cruel individual. He was organized, methodical, and always one step ahead. He had seen the news, he knew the sketch was out there, and he had simply melted away. The siege was over, but the threat was now a ghost, invisible and everywhere. Later that afternoon, Detective Evans called again, his tone different. Sober. "Mark, we found something at his apartment. In a trash bag, mixed in with old food containers." He paused. It was a list. Handwritten. It had the names and addresses of the owners of the other missing German shepherds. David, the man who gave us the sketch, his name was on it. Mark's heart hammered. "And ours?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Your address was at the bottom of the list," Evans said quietly. "But Mark, it wasn't just your address. It had your names. Yours, Clara's, and Leo's." The world tilted. This was no longer just about a dog. The cruelty, the stalking, the meticulous planning, it had all been leading to this. Ben Miller hadn't just been targeting German shepherds. He had been targeting families. He had been studying them, learning their routines, their lives, and he had placed their 2-year-old son's name on a list found in his trash. The stakes were no longer about justice for Samson. They were about survival. The nightmare had just found a new, terrifying dimension, and the walls, both real and imagined, were closing in fast. The discovery of that list, with their names, with Leo's name, shattered any last illusion of safety. The police immediately placed a patrol car outside their house 24/7. Clara packed a bag for Leo, her hand shaking so badly she could barely zip it shut. They were discussing whether to flee to a hotel, to her parents' house, anywhere, when Detective Evans called again. His voice was tight, electric with urgency. "We have a lead, a real one." His old co-worker from the landscaping company just came forward. He said Miller was always odd, obsessed with unfaithful creatures. He just remembered something. Miller sometimes talked about a family cabin. It's not in his name. It's in his mother's, who passed away years ago. It's out in the Pine Grove area, off the old logging roads. We're assembling a team now. This was it. They all felt it. The terrifying final convergence. Mark looked at Clara, then at Leo, who was clinging to Samson's fur, oblivious to the storm swirling around them. "We're coming," Mark said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He had to be there. He had to see it end. Detective Evans argued, but Mark was relentless. Finally, The detective relented on the condition they stay far back from the scene, behind the police perimeter. The drive to Pine Grove was a silent, tense blur. They park a mile down the rough dirt track, behind a line of sheriff's vehicles. The air was cold and still. From their car, they could just make out the distant, dilapidated cabin through the trees, looking dark and silent. The SWAT team moved in, a coordinated flow of dark uniforms and raised weapons. Mark held Clara's hand, their breaths held, their hearts pounding in a synchronized rhythm of dread. Then, all hell broke loose. A shout from the cabin. A crash. A single, sharp gunshot that echoed through the quiet woods. Clara buried her face in Mark's shoulder, and a sob escaped her lips. The world seemed to stop. Then, after an eternity, a voice crackled over the radio in the squad car next to them. Suspect in custody. Area is secure. A wave of relief so powerful it felt like a physical blow washed over them. It was over. It was finally over. They watched as Ben Miller was let out in handcuffs, his head bowed, his ordinary face looking pale and small. He didn't look like a monster. He just looked like a man. As the police began to process the scene, Detective Evans walked back toward them, his face grim but satisfied. He was alone in there, he said. He had a gun, but he surrendered without a real fight. He then looked past them, towards their car. You can relax now. It's finished. But as the tension finally began to drain from their bodies, a strange sound reached them from the cabin. It was a faint, frantic scratching, followed by a weak, muffled bark. It wasn't coming from inside the cabin, but from a small, padlocked shed around the back, nearly swallowed by overgrown weeds. Everyone froze. An officer rushed over with bolt cutters. The snap of the lock breaking was deafening in the sudden silence. He pulled the creaking door open, and a shaft of light fell into the dark interior. And there, curled up on a dirty blanket, was a German shepherd. She was terribly thin, her ribs showing, but alive. And nestled against her belly were 5 wriggling, newborn puppies, their eyes still closed. She looked up at her rescuers, her tail giving a single, hopeful thump against the ground. Ben Miller hadn't just been taking dogs. He'd been keeping them. He had been breeding them, a twisted, solitary operation in this isolated place. Samson hadn't been targeted for random cruelty. He was likely the father, taken and imprisoned when he was no longer needed, when Miller decided he was a problem. The horror of it was so vast, so layered, it was almost impossible to comprehend. The story of Samson, the miracle dog, had reached its climax. The villain was caught. Justice was being served. But as they watched the mother dog and her puppies being carefully carried to safety, a new chapter was already beginning. A chapter not of endings, but of new beginnings. Samson, who had been watching intently from the car, let out a soft whine. He had saved his family. And in doing so, he had led them to save another. The circle of cruelty was broken, replaced by the resilient, enduring power of a second chance. The ride home from the woods was silent. But for the first time in weeks, it was a peaceful silence. The weight that had been crushing them was finally lifted. They drove past the news van still gathered at the end of their street without stopping, a quiet understanding passing between Mark and Clara. The world could wait. Tonight was just for them. In the days that followed, the full, horrifying story of Ben Miller unfolded. In his cabin, police found meticulous journals detailing a deeply disturbed mind. He saw the loyalty of German shepherds as a lie, a performance he felt compelled to test and break. The dogs he took were part of what he called his program. Samson, a powerful and intelligent male he had stolen from a different town, was to be the sire. But Samson had fought back, refusing to be controlled, and for that defiance he was sentenced to the wall. The mother dog found in the shed, a gentle creature named Luna by the rescue workers, had been his next project. The discovery of the puppies shifted the entire case, adding charges of illegal breeding and animal hoarding to the long list of his crimes. He would be go away for a very, very long time. The media frenzy was immense. Hashtag Justice for Samson trended globally once more, but this time it was a celebration. The family was inundated with interview requests and book offers, but they politely declined them all. They had gotten what they wanted, their safety and a sense of closure. Instead, Mark and Clara sat down with Detective Evans and Sarah from the rescue, and they released a single joint statement. It thanked the community and the world for their support, confirmed that the perpetrator was in custody, and most importantly, announced the creation of the Samson Fund, a charity dedicated to supporting animal rescue efforts and providing resources for the victims of animal cruelty. It was their way of turning their nightmare into a force for good. At home, life slowly softened back into something resembling normal. The security cameras remained, but the constant, gnawing fear was gone. Mark took down the papers from the spare room wall, packing them away into a single box that he labeled simply the past. He didn't need to live there anymore. He started sleeping through the night again, the deep, restful sleep of a man who had finally stood his ground and won. The true healing, however, was visible in the small, everyday moments. Leo, now a little more verbal, would command his Sammy to follow him around the yard, and the big dog would amble patiently behind, his tail wagging a steady rhythm of contentment. Samson put on healthy weight, his coat growing in thick and glossy. The haunted look in his eyes faded, replaced by a calm, devoted warmth. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a family dog. He and Leo were inseparable, a bond forged in the most extraordinary of circumstances. A few weeks after Miller's arrest, Sarah came to visit, bringing with her an update on Luna and her puppies. "They're all thriving," she said, her face beaming. "All 5 of them. Luna is the sweetest soul. It's like she knows she's safe now." She showed them pictures on her phone of the plump, wriggling puppies, their eyes now open, exploring their world. Clara teared up, looking from the photos to Samson, who was lying protectively near Leo's playmat. It was a full-circle moment, a testament to the resilience of life. "That's wonderful," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. "What will happen to them?" "Once the puppies are weaned and Luna is spayed, they'll all be put for adoption," Sarah explained. "There's already a waiting list a mile long. Everyone wants a little piece of this happy ending." It was then that Clara spoke, her words surprising even herself. "We'd like to take Luna," she said softly. Mark looked at her, and a slow, understanding smile spread across his face. It felt right. It felt like healing. When she's ready, of course. She's a part of Samson's story. She deserves a real home, too. The day Luna came home was a quiet celebration. She was hesitant at first, lingering in the doorway, her tail tucked low. But then Samson patted over. He sniffed her gently, and she sniffed him back. There was a recognition, a silent understanding that passed between them. Then Samson gave a soft woof and nudged her further into the house with his head. It was an invitation. From that moment on, Luna relaxed. She quickly became Clara's shadow, a calm and gentle presence, while Samson remained Leo's devoted guardian. The house felt complete. The story of the baby and the dog on the wall had reached its end, but a new story was just beginning, a quieter, warmer story of family, made whole by the 2 dogs they had saved and the one who had saved them right back. The world had cried for Samson, and now it could smile for him. On a sunny afternoon, Mark stood at the kitchen window, watching Clara plant flowers in the garden, while Leo tumbled on the grass with 2 beautiful German shepherds watching over him. The memory of the wall, the fear, the darkness, it was all still there, but it no longer defined them. It was simply the shadow that made the sunlight feel so much brighter. They had faced the worst of humanity and had chosen to answer it with the very best. And in the end, that was the only resolution that ever really mattered.